Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever sacrificed some of your pieces in a game of chess? By sacrificed, I obviously mean hanging all of your pieces simultaneously in one singular move. Well, today we're going to be watching that similar spectacle, except played by two very famous grandmasters. On the white side, we have Rashid Gimbitievich Nezhmetdinov and Oleg L. Chernov. Rashid is one of the most sacrificial players in chess, like Tal, and he scored many wins using his amazing sacrifices. Chernov is also a renowned grandmaster, wrote some great books you should check out, and eventually is going to fall victim to Rashid's sacrifices. So let's begin. E4, C5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. We enter an open Sicilian of sorts. I don't recommend the open Sicilian, but these are two grandmasters, so they can really do whatever they want. And we have a dragon. I don't know why they're playing a dragon at this sort of level, but maybe in 1962, dragon was the thing. We have knight to c3. I would really rather prefer a setup with c4, which is known as the Marquis bind, where white puts his c pawn first rather than his knight, and now controls the d5 square very strongly. The bishop is blocked in, but that is not really a problem because there's so much other compensation. But instead, he plays this sort of setup, and now the c pawn isn't on c4 square, so d5 is always a viable break in the center. Not now, but later. Knight to f6, attacking the pawn, and now I love this nice f3 system. The only problems with this system is that you need to watch out for every grandmaster who says that you shouldn't open your king's diagonal. I refute this and say that in some cases it's true, but in some cases it's not. Here are two general guidelines. Number one, let's say in the opening phase, your opponent can sacrifice the knight for the pawn um when the pawn is on f3 and the pawn on e4 can be captured. This is a guideline that you should have, and in this case it doesn't really work. So because the pawn is on e6, and even if the pawn was on the e6, there is g3, and e4 is actually well defended with the knight. Secondly, if in an endgame, if black can strike with g5, g4, and break up your pawn structure. In this case, we're long away from that. We're not in the endgame, so you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. A typical game would go something like bishop castles, bishop to c4, e6, castles, d5, ed, knight d, ed. The bishop now is kind of stuck, but you can play bishop to b3, rook to e1, c3, and this is pretty much a nice position to play against black's isolated d-pawn, which is a really important concept to study. So we have bishop to c4, the regular bishop to c4, and now d5 is really optimal because it strikes the bishop in the center and also counts as a pawn break. We have castles, bishop to d3, b3. I don't understand the purpose of this move. I would think it's correlated with something like knight to d5 and c4, but if Rashid was going to play something like that, I would imagine he would play the Marquis bind. So I don't know this idea of this exactly, but I'm assuming it's something with c4, and we have knight to g4. This is also another idea of f3. It completely blocks out this move, knight to g4. The problem with knight to g4 is, like, let's say black plays d6 and you play queen to d2, knight to g4, and black gains the bishop pair. The bishop pair is a really important concept you should also study. It's where the opposing person has two bishops. With two bishops, you should attempt to open the position and try to use your bishops, because bishops control a lot more squares rather than knights, which control less squares but more quality squares, which are better in closed positions. So, in a summary, you should open your position. You should not trade off either of your bishops in an optimal situation, and you should try to attack, because the whole point of a bishop pair is that you can attack better because the opponent doesn't have the bishop to defend the position. In theory, of course, that is. In practical sense, it's much different. We have castles. I don't understand. No, wait. This is the theory line. And castles, not castles, but you would have to play knight takes c6 and this sort of stuff. And black in this example position is dominantly better. He has the both diagonals. His pawn is cutting off any advancement from the white knight, as you can see here. So black is, I would even say, much better. Not much better, but better in positional standpoint. So instead, Chernikov goes for this interesting tactic. I would recommend going slow and doing this maybe later if it's a must. I would recommend d6, of course, a slower move. And then only knight to g4 because you really win the bishop here. Unless they see this kind of idea, which I imagine isn't going to happen. So we have, instead we have queen, no, not queen to d2, I'm sorry. We have knight to g4, queen takes g4, knight takes d4, and Chernikov decides he's going to open up his bishop. He's going to take advantage of the queen, and he's going to try to destroy Rashid. So as you can see, it looks like Chernikov is much better. d6 attacks the queen, developing the pieces, and the bishop is defending the knight, which is going to plow white's bishop, and he's going to obtain the bishop pair, which I meticulously explained is an extremely great thing for black. We have queen to h4, avoiding this, and preparing a bishop to h6, queen to a5, bringing out the queen. I don't exactly recommend bringing out the queen in this early middle game or early opening phase. I would recommend the simple d6. As I said earlier, bringing the queen out and actually preparing some sort of queen trap potentially with bishop to f6. So we have queen to f5. I don't like this move. I don't get the purpose. If you take on e7, there is, I can't move the pieces. There is the plowing of the position, and this isn't a position you want to be in because black has various checks and actually can probably obtain a perpetual. And b6 for quick development with bishop to b7 is also optimal. So instead we have castles, bishop to f6, and now the interesting sacrifice. Firstly, this is one of the sacrifices I would not recommend for anybody under 4,000 elo. We have queen takes f6. And the point is, if you capture, which a lot of you would do, white, Rashid actually gains massive development if you try to protect the pawn. And if you just play normally, you actually get checkmated. I know you get checkmated, literally. So, knight to e2 is this knight Zwischenzug, where I'm losing, I don't know, Chervinok, Chern Chern Chereknov is forcing the white knight, Rashid's knight, back to e2, where it now has to make an extra move to get back to that position, where black now has an extra move to defend. Rook to e8, putting pressure on the e4 pawn, and I would, of course, recommend a move like f3, or since he sacrificed a queen, maybe a more aggressive move like in the game, knight to d5. He's targeting the f6 pawn, obviously, and Chernikov defends. I want to note that Chernikov can actually lose as much material as he wants, unless he loses a rook for free and a pawn. But then Chernikov would have massive compensation. And if you see here, you'll be like, okay, Chernikov obviously won this game. I hit my lip. Because he's a queen and he's a rook. Even if you said that most of his pieces aren't participating, his queen and the rook versus the knight, the bishop, and the two bishops is 9 versus 14, and 14 is the obvious winner. Obviously, right? But in fact, this is actually incorrect because, firstly, like you mentioned before, Chernikov's extra 8 points of material aren't working. But it seems as though Rashid's pieces can actually get quickly into the action because let's say you can open up the f1 rook with f4, and the other rook can simply come to the center whenever needed, and as we'll say later in the game, for a rook lift. In fact, we have bishop to d4. Rashid is targeting the f6 pawn, king to g7, and rook a to d1. I was considering a move like f4 earlier when I was looking at this game, f5, but I guess this is a bit, over the board because black probably won't play these moves, but here these bishops are absolutely destroying Chernikov's position. Even if you argue now that he has 14 points of material and 3 to come, I don't see where that rook's coming into play. That queen definitely isn't helping. So I would consider it a 3-on-0 plus the 5 point of rook that's going to come over here. So I would say that actually white is striking with the 14 points of material, not black. We have rook to ad1, more of a waiting move, I guess, for this interesting rook lift. Though I would be a bit, you know, suspicious about this position because this rook move lift takes 3 moves to accomplish, but Rashid calculated this out and sees that these 3 moves really can't do anything for Chernikov. In fact, it actually doesn't help. And this queen must go back to d8, where now Rashid is getting massive development, and the game ends in a few moves. I'll just discuss some of the moves I missed. If you take on f1, you lose the queen. If you play queen to a6, there's knight to c7, royal fork. And when if you take on f6, there's bishop takes f6, of course, and then rook takes f6. And if you take on f1, there's discoveries everywhere, and you lose your life. So, with bishop to e2, it doesn't really matter what you play. Knight takes h7, sacrificing the knight, because actually, if you capture, there's a really simple tactic. Not that. There's a really simple winning position, actually. Because when you capture here, what is happening? In here, you can actually just completely win the position. You might say, oh, there's 14 points. I do not care. This 11 points is going to win. No matter what, there's literally checkmate. There's no way that black can survive. I don't care if you lose all of your pawns suddenly. He's still gonna lose. So, king to g8, and rook to h3. He's preparing knight to g5, and rook to h8 checkmate, which would be illustrated as this. In this, we have rook to e5, blocking the pin. The attack. And as I told you, Chernikov can sacrifice as much material as he wants. Especially a rook for a bishop would be an extremely fine trade. But he sticks with f4, attacking the rook with the pawn. He would gladly take a free rook. And the exchange happens. I don't know why he doesn't take. I guess it's a flex to the world that he's better. And instead he plays bishop to d4. b5, doesn't matter what happens. And now Rashid drops the last attack. Knight to g5, expertly crafted in sacrifice. And actually, there's this nice tactic, and you win too much material. You can probably play this out. You would probably win, even if you lost your rook, 2 pawns, and 3 pawns. You would still win with 1 pawn against 5 pawns and a knight. But these are 2 GMs, and sadly, they can't do that like you. Thank you for your viewership. Like and subscribe. See you later. Check out some of my other videos. And now get out here.